Yeah, I mean, at that level, the CFO's job is at that stage, you either have a thesis that says we're going to buy the hold, or eventually we may be getting rolled up, right? So that's the strategic side of that individual. And then what do your financial statements look like? What do your consolidated statements look like? Are they matching what that future buyer might want to handle? That would be a project that a CFO would undertake. I mean, even at the lower level, we'd be working on basic tax strategies, on cost segregation, and working with the CPA, early on in each of those.
Welcome everyone to the podcast. Have you wondered what a fractional CFO is and if your business would benefit from one? Or perhaps you just want to know what a CFO is and what role they play. Today, I'm thrilled to host Brennan de Raad, the founder of Vessel Advisors. Brennan works primarily with professional service firms and software companies where he brings his experience of developing and implementing strategic financial and operational plans. Welcome, Brennan.
Hi, great to be here.
Happy to have you. Let's start with a simple question. What is a fractional CFO and what role do they play?
Yeah, great question. So fractional CFO, as it sounds, is a CFO, but not full-time. And what does a CFO do? Well, ultimately that position is really designed to be a strategic financial leader. And we look at that at Vessel as usually the opposite skill set as a visionary entrepreneur or CEO. So if there's a quintessential item out there or description of a founder out there, they're usually a risk taker, they're driven, they're creative, they're out in front, they're taking the next hill. If the CFO's job is to be the other side of that brain, is to look a little bit more strategically and say, this is the impact of that decision, or if we make that change to the plan, here's what that's going to result in, maybe positively and potentially negatively, to give a little bit of a pause and a little bit of an adjustment. Fractionally, right, means less than full-time. But a full-time CFO, at least where we're based in Irvine, California, it's going to cost you multiple six figures. And that's for kind of the entry-level option there. So fractional allows for companies that need that strategic advice at the financial level to have someone maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 hours a week. In some cases, 5, 10, 15, 20 hours a month to provide that other side of the brain for that strategic, visionary leader, but for somebody who thinks about the business a little bit differently.
Can you explain this more in the context of multifamily syndication?
Yeah, absolutely. In multifamily syndication, you have a lot going on. You have the actual deal, you're identifying the deal, you're reviewing the deal, you might be getting into LOI or diligence, you might be closing out a deal related to financing. And then once you're actually fully implemented, taking it over, there's a lot of maintenance and management and monitoring of what's going on. So the CFO's job is to look over all of that. And in the case of, let's say you own one property, one building versus 10 buildings, that CFO's role is going to look a lot different. If you own a significant portfolio, that CFO is likely overseeing a decent sized staff of either accountants and potentially even some property managers. For a single property, they're going to be much more hyper focused on potentially being in the weeds for the start of that program. I've seen, at least on our side, we work with individuals who are really good at everything up until the deal being closed. And then they get bored and they need someone to come in and just manage and be consistent, have controls in place and to advise the ownership group as to what should be changing. We have others that they identify the property, but they don't know the first thing about managing or building out a pro forma or stress testing that pro forma. And so that CFO can also often provide more of what's called an FP&A service or a financial planning and analysis service related to that potential acquisition.
Okay, so the CFO oversees the accounting of the properties themselves, as well as overseeing the umbrella company that sponsors the deals. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. And some other things that they may be involved in. Again, this is deal specific. They may be the one actually working directly with the bank. They may be the one directly working with LPs. If you have limited partners or investors in the deal, they may be involved as the main point of contact with your tax CPA or your advisors. Sometimes even with counsel with your attorney as you're looking through and going through those processes. Again, it's really a matching of all those fit under a traditional corporate CFO level. Like those are all stools or legs to the stool that sit around that CFO level. But specifically in multifamily, we certainly see individuals who like a certain portion of that. Maybe they have a tax background, or maybe they're very comfortable handling all those things themselves and they want to. They just want the person to handle the consistency, post close of that transaction.
Okay, and what you're describing, a lot of the roles and responsibilities you're describing are what an asset manager does as well. So how does a CFO complement an asset manager how does a CFO, add value? And if you have an asset manager?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's an asset manager, the CFO is usually in some type of a supporting role, right? So that CFO might have oversight over, let's say the asset manager has, 25 different assets. The CFO's role might be more limited on a certain scale. We would typically call that a group CFO, who would oversee, anything over 4 individual properties. They have a lot of crossover though. I mean, a lot of things I just described can be handled from the asset management side. And so it's probably a little bit more of a function of, again, who's the owner, who's the investor, and what are they specifically looking for. We work with a lot of people who they just buy property. And so there's no specific asset manager. Like they are everything, right? They're the entrepreneur. They're all the things I just described, but they also know there's not a competence level for them personally to be able to handle all those things at the level they're getting to. Maybe they could do it for a duplex or a smaller property, but as they start to grow in the business, they need someone who's been there, done that.
Okay. So it sounds like a lot of the work you do are with maybe a small company or individual entrepreneurs who are buying multiple small parcels of real estate, maybe, few units here and there, but they package, once they get large enough, they need assistance in overseeing the finances. Is that the majority of your
right? Yeah, that's the majority of our business. Imagine, you kind of start with a single or a double, and you start adding on top of those, all of a sudden you've got 7, 8, 9, 10 properties. It's become a much larger management issue, but you're also not large enough to be engaging with someone maybe at a true asset management level. But yeah, we have clients they're starting in QuickBooks and they're moving up to say Yardi, MRI, other types of tools that are much more robust. And we have others that are completely comfortable sitting in the lane that they're in, and it's more of a management of the day to day and the week to week. So take that off their plate to free up their time.
Got it. And I feel like a CFO would be beneficial in those circumstances, as you mentioned, but then also when a company such as ours, multifamily syndication company, grows large enough, they need that additional oversight. So can you describe, say a company with 30 assets, large complexes, 200 or 400 units all over the US. How does CFO in place help with, financial optimization, tax planning, risk management, all those types of things?
Yeah, I mean, at that level, the CFO's job is at that stage, you either have a thesis that says we're going to buy the hold, or eventually we may be getting rolled up, right? So that's the strategic side of that individual. And then what do your financial statements look like? What do your consolidated statements look like? Are they matching what that future buyer might want to handle? That would be a project that a CFO would undertake. Certainly, even at the lower level, we'd be working on basic tax strategies, on cost segregation, and working with the CPA, early on in each of those. But yeah, as you get larger, the problems are going to get bigger. The day-to-day is going to be handled because, again, you're going to be pushing that cost down to likely an outsourced accounting team, or if you're large enough, an in-house accounting team that CFO is looking over. The other kind of more macro issues, the bigger the companies get, are looking at the markets, understanding the financing terms, right? For a portfolio of that size, the banks and the conversations the conversations you're having with your bankers and the level of banker that you are working with is drastically different than maybe when you're getting started, or when you had a couple properties at a basic level. You're kind of wheeling and dealing, trying to find the best option. As you start to have critical mass, you become much more attractive to larger and larger groups, and that's the CFO's job, is to not just have the relationships to bring those together, but to also be the one facilitating and constantly in the market looking for the best deals. That can be pricing, that could be terms, that can be just bringing the ownership group up to speed on this is what's changing. Obviously, everyone can see over the last year and a half, interest rates rising. That's obvious. But the other things might be, okay, well, what are lenders actually concerned about? What are we hearing across fractional? What are we hearing across 20 different clients or 10 different clients that are all in different stages of either financing, or their 5 years, 7 year, 10 years are coming up. Those are more of this executive level financial conversations you'd be having with a larger portfolio.
Yes, I think you bring up a great point. Debt financing is a huge area of or a huge time commitment, really, especially on our end when we have certain deals that have 2-3 year terms. in terms of debt, and we're looking to refinance, in a market that doesn't necessarily support,
the original pro forma. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Our pro forma. So the question is, in this environment, how, what kind of relationships does a CFO have with various banks and lenders that could be of help?
Yeah. So I think the first part is just having a relationship. So if you're going in completely cold, right, you're building trust, you're working through all those stages of a working relationship, versus, hey, I've worked with this individual for 5, 10, 15, some of our CFOs on our team, 25 years, right? So we understand not just what that bank particularly is good at or what their appetite is, what that particular banker is interested in and how they work and how they engage. Are they someone that's very much, they're going to check boxes and you're either in or you're out? There's a lot of bankers that do that. A lot of bankers that have their hands tied, right? There's certain institutions that just, you have to meet these requirements, otherwise it's going somewhere else. Depending on the size, a lot of like local, regional, even state, type banks. So the relationship side is really important to just know where to go to start. From there, in this environment, it's complicated, right? It's not easy. It's a challenge. There's, I know that, if I compared it to 2 years ago, it's just, it's taking triple the time and often not resulting in what we're looking for, right? The options on the table are limited. Much like in, we work in technology, the venture market, right? Venture markets, there are certain areas that are still doing great and getting funded, and you're in clean tech or a few other spaces, right? It's fairly straightforward. It hasn't changed dramatically. If you're in pretty much anything else, you're struggling. You're having to get 3 times the meetings or double the meetings just to get to the same position, likely at worse terms. So right now, the process, I would say or the value add for the CFO and the value of that bank relationship is that you as the owner aren't having to handle all those. So that's a time savings. And then you're also getting introduced, hopefully from that CFO, into many, many more banking options that create hopefully a market for what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And I think that last statement you made is key there, because if you form a good relationship with a lender, with a bank, that relationship could carry a ton of weight. And, I'll give you an example. We just recently formed a relationship with Sandy Springs Bank. And the way we created that relationship was through an advisor of ours who had a longitudinal programmatic relationship with that bank. And he introduced us. It was a warm introduction. They saw what we did. We started working together in various ways, and they offered us lines of credit and things that we normally wouldn't get otherwise. So those types of relationships are critical. And, we as a company are always looking for opportunities to build more of those relationships. And ideally, what we'd like is to work with one bank, one lender for every transaction. That would be ideal. Is this something, let's use Viking as an example. If we got you guys involved as a fractional CFO advisor, how would you be able to help us form these relationships and perhaps put together debt structures that we wouldn't normally otherwise?
Yeah, great question. We would we'd start our discovery process to start, right? So we would have to get to know the business in all its detail. That's usually going back 3 years on the financial statements and starting to build out what that eventual banker, any new introduction we're going to make, what they're going to do. They're going to go out and they're going to build what's called a spread. So they're going to take your financial statements. They're going to look at everything at whatever level of detail they can, ideally reviewed financials or audited financial statements. We're going to go in and do that process. And based on that, it's going to shortlist a certain number of banks that are going to be interested, right? So let's say we have a pool of 25 banks or 30 banks of relationships. Well, maybe 5, 10, 15 of them not fit that pool. Next, we're going to get a much better understanding of what your vision is. So that could be you personally, or what the fund is trying to do both now and over the next 3, 5, 10 years. That may also limit who you're working with, right? Certain banks may have certain terms and structures that will work for someone who's doing, land entitlement all the way through to development and sale. Others prefer more the buy and hold strategy. And someone who's going to hold that, like they're going to hold paper, they're going to hold a portion of paper. So we're going to do all that work, and then we might have down to 5, 6, 7 banks that we want to go talk to. At that point, when you're having those conversations and making those introductions, the CFO is at the table and really driving driving the whole thing home. The introduction would be, talk about Viking, talk about the history, bring them up to speed on some of that, 15, 20 minutes. But the rest of that meeting for an hour, hour and a half is going to be the CFO going back and forth with that banker and already ready with a couple things. One, they already have all the financial statements ahead of time or documented. Two, there's a narrative as to what's been going on over the last 1 to 3 years. If things have been hard, we would go back 3 years to really try and sell that story. What we're doing there is we're doing the banker's job for them, right? We're handing them all the information that they're going to ultimately have to put together to go to either their senior or to their loan committee and have a conversation about, hey, this is what this relationship is going to be able to do. But we want to do all the work through discovery, analysis, and ultimately recommending kind of an investor outreach plan, in this case, a banking outreach plan, and then walking alongside you through that process, ultimately to the point of the decision and saying, this is where we're going to go. To your other item of, hey, it would be great to work with one bank. I think that's aspirational, and there are certain banks that will just constantly provide you with the absolute best all the time. I also think one of the roles of the CFO is to price shop, right? If you're in this space, your vendors, your property managers, your software, your lenders, right? You need to, your insurance, all these things are in a competitive marketplace that does change over time. And if you're not checking it at least every couple of years on each of those items, you're likely overpaying, right? Someone's letting go or letting the rope a little too loose, and you're paying for it. So first question is kind of, that's how Vessel would do it, but also know that if there's a bank out there that can do everything all the time, I'd love to get introduced to them. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Part of the value of having having the knowledge of all those different, like just like our firm, just like your firm, we have our niche area. This is where we're really successful. Banks are no different, right? And they're gonna want to play in certain sandboxes, and others they don't.
Absolutely. Okay, appreciate that answer. Now, let me ask you this. A lot of people I've spoken to about CFOs say, well, your interests aren't necessarily aligned because they can come in, they could clean your business up as much as they can. You're paying them an hourly rate, and typically it's more than you'd pay for an in-house CFO per hour. And if things don't work out, they can just kind of easily cut out, and they have like 10 other clients that they are working with. How would you respond to a concern like that?
Yeah, I think it's a great concern to have and something to think about. So early on, when we're engaging with a new call to prospect, we're asking questions about what their goals are, what their current team looks like. And we talked about discovery earlier for banking. We do the same thing as a service to clients, and sometimes a very lightweight one, just during the sales process at no charge. And we'll frequently tell someone, you need to go hire someone full time, right? The problem, the complexity, the responsiveness that you need, the requirements that you have for the culture of that organization, that necessitates somebody on site. So you should do that, or we need to find a fraction who can be physically with you, 2 full days a week or 3 full days a week. And around 3 days a week is where the whole math equation completely breaks, right? It makes more sense to do it full time. So that's one, is that we're not here just to sell and be a fractional CFO. We want to find the right solution. And in those cases, I'll often refer them to a recruiter who only does accounting or finance positions, or someone who only does executive level positions to make sure that they have a solution for that. But what I would say is there are a couple downsides when you're hiring that CFO, right? One, it's a very expensive position. Like I mentioned, at least in Orange County, California, we're based in Irvine. $300,000 is the starting point per year. That's the starting point for a good CFO. It's $450,000, $500,000, and there's usually other types of comp on top of that. There's payroll tax, there's insurance, there's D&O. There's a lot of things that you're going to have to start lining up on top of that number, to where you're biting off a big chunk. And if you're in that, anywhere from 3 million to 50 million a year revenue range, to 100 million a year revenue range, it can feel pretty painful, especially depending on what your margins look like. Two, yes, the CFO could jump. I acknowledge that. Part of the value of working with someone like our company, Vessel, or other fractional CFO groups out there is that you're usually supported by an entire team. So there's a CFO, but there's also some type of an account manager, project manager, there's back office, and then there's a managing director. So you have a multitude of relationships within that one organization. Yes, you're working 99% of the time with your CFO, but there's others in there who are fully aware of what's going on a weekly basis. All that information is being stored internally. That's more for us selfishly, like if that individual has a health issue or something happens, which can happen to any employee as well, we want to be prepared to be able to step in that next week and say, listen, we're as up to speed as here. Let us move quickly. So there's a value out there. But the flip side to what you said about them being able to leave is oftentimes that's valuable for that company. Oftentimes the needs of the CFO, the strategic decisions and the strategic vision that gets set up and then implemented takes 6 months or a year, and then you're just overpaying for someone to sit in that seat and be what I would call a glorified, controller or glorified VP of finance.
Right.
And so you really have to assess like what's the need. So short term, yes, we're often coming in to fix some kind of a problem or to optimize something that's working okay, but not quite there from a technology or people or process perspective. Those are not permanent issues. And so if we're there for 6 months or a year, even 18 months, that's a relatively short period of time in the life cycle of the 10, 20, 30 year vision for a company. That said, we also don't choose to leave if we don't need to, but one of our core tenets is that we have a unique value prop that says our success is actually either hiring the person to replace us or slowly over time moving our scope down because we're equipping other people on the team, whether that be a staff accountant, a controller, a VP finance, an FP&A individual. Our success is actually doing that. So if we're with you for more than 2 years, probably there is something wrong, right? We haven't clarified that, and there needs to be an update to the scope of what's working. The final thing that I'll put on that topic is it's great for a CFO to be in one place for a long time. You obviously get a lot of knowledge of how that particular company works and how things are working. But one of the values of working with a fractional is that they might be on 2, 3, 4, hopefully not 10, but maybe 10 other engagements personally. So they're watching how other organizations are leveraging technology, certain processes that are really good over here, over there. And then again, working with a group like Vessel, we have dozens of these individuals, and as they're sharing information, that knowledge share gets disseminated out to other companies. So within technology or within real estate, there's tools and things that are coming out, products that are coming out, technology that's coming out that has really good application, and we have the benefit of saying, hey, this is how it didn't work over here. We're not going to cite that company, but we know that tool didn't work here for this reason, but it would work over here, and we know that because we've actually used it, not because we're reading a one pager from the software company or doing a demo with them online. We've actually engaged with it, and we've done it in the last 6 months or a year or 2 years. It's very fresh and relevant. And you don't get that when you have someone who's been in one company, one role for 10 years. They tend to get, maybe they're very good, but they're going to get complacent in the technology tools and stack.
Those are great answers to that concern. And I can certainly see the benefit as you've outlined it. Okay, thanks, Brennan. So do you have CFO that specialize in certain areas? Maybe a CFO that specializes in technology, another one software, another one in real estate?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we have specific verticals that we live in. One of them is real estate. That includes everything from the asset investment side to GCs to subcontractors. So we kind of bucket that all under that section. And we have CFOs that 10, 15, 20, 25 years experience in those specific spaces. So again, when you're engaging with someone on our team, or again, if you're out looking for a fractional CFO, you want to make sure they've been down that road, not just for a couple of years, but they've been doing this for a long time, ideally working with very large organizations and working with some smaller ones. Most of our CFOs have some type of Big Four background, so they're structured in that way, but also the real life application of how things are working on the private side. We do technology. Professional services is a big umbrella. We work a lot with IT managed services, like brand development agencies, brand identity agencies, marketing agencies, a couple law firms. The idea being that if you're working on the billable hour, there are likely ways to optimize utilization to bring that up. So same cost structure, but driving more efficiency for each individual. We can do that through measurement and monitoring and managing those specific individuals on maybe a weekly or monthly basis. We work quite a bit in manufacturing. So same thing, you think about an assembly line, breaking the different parts down. Our job is to identify that. We work with certain nonprofits, larger nonprofits. So they have to have a certain balance sheet size to make the fractional CFO worthwhile. But that can be really helpful when those companies or those nonprofits start to get to a stage where compliance, governance, annual audits, things like that start to take up more and more of their time, or no one on their board is set up to do that, or all the volunteers internally, aren't willing to touch that part of the business. And so that's where we sit. My background personally is I come from technology and software, but I have also a lot of crossover in the real estate space, both through jobs prior to starting this company, as well as, one of our first clients is one of the largest ERD um, uh, custom implementers or consultants in the world. And I had a chance to work with them, help them grow for a long time, and get exposed to some of the biggest asset managers and third party managers in the world.
Excellent. That's great. So let me ask you a question, and maybe you can give us a real life example of how you helped a multifamily syndication company or something similar to navigate the market currently. So a lot of us as sponsors are experiencing a problem with bridge debt. Several years ago, that's all you could get. So, multiple properties that we have, we've got 2-3 year term bridge debt where we have rate cap insurance on them, which was cheap at the time, but now it's extraordinarily expensive. We're looking at refinancing, extending the current bridge, but then you have to pay rate cap insurance. If a company is undergoing those struggles, such as we are, how would you help in this situation? And maybe give us an example of how you.
Yeah. So we should go back to the question prior about really understanding the current situation from a strategic CFO perspective. That's discovery, analysis, and then a recommendation, which is really just a plan that says, here, based on your unique experience, these are the banks, these are the individuals you can talk to. I will say, we're seeing real life examples. We're seeing capital calls. We're seeing the things that you don't want to talk about. But again, part of the CFO's job is to put their hand up and go, listen, here are the avenues that you have, or here are the avenues we've now extinguished. And in your particular situation, we're under, or the bank is going to require something else of us. And we have to have that. Sometimes we can do that with different other types of collateral or other types of letter of credit or posting something else that can come up. But just know that that's also part of the CFO's job, is to sometimes bring really bad news. It says that thing we never want to talk about and don't ever want to do. We're 3 weeks out, or we're 6 weeks out from hitting that if these other 2 items don't execute. So I'd say we start with some type of a custom structure and then move it forward there. In the current market, we're seeing everything from you mentioned the multifamily, the cost increasing, and we're seeing it if we look at real estate as a whole. We're seeing it with our GCs or subcontractors. Their line of credit renewal processes are much more onerous. They're asking a lot more questions. We're providing a lot more documentation. The terms that are coming back are weaker. It's prime plus now on many of those. So we're by default paying about a 1.5% higher rate, and that's the best thing we can get versus a year and a half, 2 years ago, where if we would have renewed at that moment in time, or if renewal was coming up at that time, it'd be a completely different conversation. So I think that there's some hard medicine just in terms of understanding what the current market is, setting expectations, getting the individuals at least aware of that, so that you maybe as the syndicate are not fully bearing that responsibility or that knowledge. You need to share that this is really where we are. But I think the best thing you can do is have a very clear action plan as to these are all the avenues. And again, the strategic CFO's job when it hits the fan like that is to get through and ideally to know 6 months ahead of time that that's coming. But if you're in that situation right now and you don't have a CFO, I'd suggest at least engaging or having the conversation with someone who can put together a much more personalized structure in terms of not just loans, but other capital sources.
Got it. Okay. So as far as options, that's what you are there for. You're there to come up with a strategic plan to help these sponsors navigate what is the best avenue of action. As far as real life examples, do you have any that you could share that maybe where you've come up with?
Share any that are like recent, specific for multifamily, like in the last 6 months? No, I wouldn't share anything publicly related to those other than what I just did. It's a challenging market. More broadly, your CFO's job is to review, analyze, come up with insights, and make recommendations. So earlier you were saying it's their job to come up with a plan. It's also to come up with the recommended plan. It's not just here are all your options. Now take the monkey off my back and hand it back to you. Their job to make that recommendation. Now, ultimately, it's your decision to go with the recommendation or to not. But in many instances like this, sometimes if the you might not have a capital call option, right? So we have to, that might just be completely off the table. In other situations, that's not an issue at all. And it's a 6-month or 8-month or 12-month gap. And yeah, it's going to damage all the return metrics, but it's going to get us through on that deal. I will say actually in the last, probably 3 months since June, seeing certain projects just stop and say, listen, pro forma doesn't work anymore. They might be at the land stage or they've just gone, subterranean. Construction started. They're building some type of high rise. They're going to pause the project for an indefinite period of time. It might be 6 months, might be 2 years. We don't really know. They have the cash to be able to sit on it and continue to service the debt that they do, but it doesn't make sense at the rates they are today to continue on with the build, or the market data has changed dramatically from 16, 18, 24 months ago, from when they wrote everything out to hit there. So we have had some of those more recently, and that might be a little more of a real life example of a press pause than others. But again, that requires the ability to wait out and handle the cash flow for an extended period of time.
And then another question, and this is something that I've heard multiple colleagues have as a unfortunate consequence of the structure that they've created. Unbeknownst to them, they're in a period where their loan is coming up. They're not able to hit debt service. They're potentially, the property value has dropped to even below the debt amount, and they're looking to just walk away. How would a CFO
Absolutely.
help in this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, they'd be in that meeting room and in those meetings over the course of days and weeks, making those decisions. Again, it's going to be specific to that personal deal or the access to capital that deal has. But if you're underwater and your indication on that overall market is that we're not anywhere near the bottom, then from an analytical perspective, from a pro forma perspective, walking away does make unfortunately some sense. And we're seeing that with office. We don't do a lot of work with office, but if you just read the news on San Francisco or other large office markets, you see some marquee properties where they're saying, "Here, have it back." The bank takes it back.
Yeah.
So that is a scenario that sometimes mathematically is not the best decision in terms of how you feel about it, but it's the right financial decision. And again, that's your CFO's job, is to present those options to you and say, here's what we require in terms of capital, and here's how much longer we think, it's going to be 18 months, 24 months, 36 months before this even gets back to the debt level. And candidly, at that point, you might not even be in control, because the bank is going to come and say, listen, you can't service the debt. We own the paper. We're going to take it, and we'd rather get rid of it now rather than wait another 12 months, for you to try and hold it out, because our value on that property is just going to, their internal forecasting is saying it's going to come down. Now that's market by market, individual place by place. And I know I'm in Southern California. If you talk to any of the brokers that are doing, or anybody who's working in industrial, it's never been better, and they're building industrial everywhere. But if you're in office, especially, high-rise office or things like that, it's a struggle. They're converting some of them to multifamily actually, as a strategy, or knocking down smaller buildings and building multifamily 3, 4, 5 story structure.
Yes. Kind of in that light, there are other groups that are putting together private equity funds to help support some of these assets. Would you guys help in that? Help put that strategy together,
like a distress structure. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, and again, that might be if you're sitting there as a CFO working with a client, and someone comes and says, "Hey, we have an out for you," that it's going to wipe a lot of your equity, or all of it goes to all the off the table. But there's some type of waterfall, or it's an exit that doesn't require handing it back to the bank. That might be the CFO's job to sit there and analyze that piece. But yeah, we've actually frequently worked with smaller PE groups, not necessarily in this space, but just generally on their deal diligence, and then also on either buy or sell side for different transactions. So absolutely, CFO's job is to sit in there, and something like that. It might be more of an advisory service. You're not going to need that permanently, and again, that might be a benefit of working with someone fractionally or hiring a consultant part time, rather than thinking of I need a semi full time CFO.
Great. And switching gears a little bit here, many folks are thinking about hiring a financial analyst or a controller, or maybe even a CFO, and are unsure of who they should hire. How would you be able to help in that regard?
Yeah. So our firm at Vessel, we have all those on a fractional basis. We don't do placements. We don't do, kind of short-term to hire or anything like that, but we do it on a fractional basis. And what I always tell people is we're always open to a call. And if we can help in any of those ways, whether it's us helping or us pointing you to a better direction, we're here to help. That's big on our walls here, is we're here to help. The other portion is sometimes you just need to talk out what you actually need. How do I explain this? To like a technology group, sometimes a CFO or founder will be told by a board member, hey, you need a fractional CFO, right? And so they go, okay, we got to go find a fractional CFO. Well, when you talk to them and understand what's going on internally, really what they need is a controller. And maybe they need a little bit stronger bench of staff internally than they have right now. So a fractional CFO can help point them in that right direction. And for a period, maybe sit on top of that if that's what's needed. But oftentimes just that conversation, that call is all that individual needs, just to have some confidence to say, okay, I know what they're saying. Like the way I interpreted fractional CFO, it's not a title. We need more systems and structure and process. And what they're expecting to see at the board meeting is very different than, what we're delivering today. Let me go solve that problem rather than, I have to go hire this specific position right now. So I would encourage people to look at that if you're considering it. And I would say take your time if you have the time. You usually don't have to jump into these things instantly. You can shop it around. You can make sure that you have somebody that's going to be focused on your industry, but also is a good interpersonal fit, because you're asking someone to come usually right alongside that CEO or the founder. Sometimes we'll work under a COO, but it's a leadership team member, and that person needs to integrate interpersonally, not just technically and from an experience perspective into the team.
Yeah, and I can just share an example that we were talking about before the podcast began, Brennan, where we actually 2 years ago, we had a conversation. We were discussing potentially using your services, and we decided that we needed somebody in-house, and we ended up hiring a CFO. But the problem was that CFO was so high level. His experience was where he would assign people tasks to do it, and he really didn't have the capability to get his hands dirty and actually do those things himself. So he ended up actually deciding that he wanted to leave. We felt that he needed to go as well. It was a mutually, kind of beneficial move to get him out.
Perfect.
And then we hired somebody else who was a lower level, but he still wasn't exactly what we needed. Now we're looking for a third person, which is more of an analyst position that is going to help us, maybe the analyst controller type position that you were mentioning. That's going to help us with some of the lower level tasks. We realize that that's really where we are. I think if we got you involved earlier, we would have come to this decision much more quickly and without so much heartache and pain and cost, because that question would have been answered, in a short period of time after you seeing, what we needed. So that's just something I learned and something I want to share with you.
Yeah, it's a good anecdote, and it's a good reminder too. And again, part of why we're structured this way is I had experiences when I was working in when I was full time, where I'd sometimes say, man, I'm getting really overpaid right now to do this really basic task, or I'm getting very underpaid, or the company is paying because I haven't done this before for them or in this particular industry. And then oftentimes, I said earlier, maybe the board member is telling the owner, hey, you need to see a fractional CFO. Well, he might be right, but you maybe only need that 10, 15, 20 hours a month. And that's really just somebody to sit with you weekly to understand the business and to make sure that the trains are on the track. The controller is really what you need, but you need both. And so we do that as a combined service. I'd say at least half, if not probably more, if should look at that as a stat, probably over half this year, certainly of folks that engage with us, it's a combination and it's a discussion, right? It's either through discovery, if we're doing a deep dive for 4 or 5 weeks with them, or it's a couple phone calls if it's a lighter weight engagement, or we're just asking questions and trying to understand what do you really need and where are you currently today in terms of system structure control, and then forecasting KPIs. What's your cadence? What's your consistency? What level of access to data do you really have? Is there confidence in that data? Those are all things that sit under finance accounting, but the individual that you're going to need to help can really vary. I'd end with this. Having a fractional CFO, part of the value is you can start at a certain level, but you can scale it down, and you can also scale it up. So depending on that person's individual capacity on our team, having a CFO and a controller creates again a little bit of a yin and yang, even within the accounting department, so you're paying a lot less, if you need that person to do more blocking and tackling. Or if you really want that CFO just to do everything, we have a lot of individuals who, they can book your journal entries. They could come in and fill in on basic, APAR if it had to be done, but their skill set and their experience is much higher. A controller's job is, a very different job than a CFO. And if you're asking the CFO to do a controller's job or vice versa, you're going to be disappointed. I'll tell you that. I'll tell you that right away.
Yeah. Just a last question before we end. How does that differ? How does a controller and a CFO differ?
Yeah. So think of a controller as your job is consistency, systems, precision, process, right? So you're the escalation point of contact for the accounting team. You are running either weekly or monthly close cycles. You are responsible for internal controls. You're usually the one having kind of most of the tax CPA interaction. If you have a review or an audit, you're most engaged. And then you're also engaging on a lot of the ad hoc reporting requests. So, hey, we noticed something in this report, we want to investigate it. The controller is going to take the time to go in and into the deep dive there. CFO's job is to be more strategic. So they're going to sit with an executive team. They're going to be taking whatever the CEO is saying, hey, this is the goalpost, this is the vision. And they're going to build the plan behind that from a financial side, and usually work with like a director of ops or COO, a CTO, whoever else is on that leadership team, HR, to make sure that all those pieces are coming together, and then go back to the leadership or the CEO with the plan. They're holding everybody accountable at a senior level. So they're pointing out, where the issues are and saying, this is what's the problem is this, who is responsible for it, and then let that person deal with the how. But that's a really quick version of the differentiation. It's a senior level executive versus a still senior level manager type difference. And I'd also argue that the CFO usually has to have a bit more of a stronger personality, an ability to interact with bankers and sell the vision, as well as work with the accounting team and kind of translate. Sometimes people see accountants as they're speaking their own language, and we do. But somebody who can translate a little better. The accountant or the controller is usually still in that accountant stage and isn't quite as engaged at a sales level or a banker relationship, CPA relationship level.
Excellent. Well, Brennan, this was wonderful. I really appreciate your time, and
thanks for having me.
Very informative. I'm sure our listeners will get a ton out of it. If they want to contact you, if they're interested in learning more about Vessel Advisors, how could they do so?
Yeah, check out vesseladvisors.com, and we have a whole bunch of information there, or they can email us at listen@vesseladvisors.com.
Excellent. Thank you again.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.